All right, so we're going to talk about debugging today. This is like one of my favorite lessons, one of my favorite topics because it's never going away. Like you're always going to write bugs. I always am going to write bugs. Your teammates are always going to write bugs. And so we need a process to identify those bugs and go about fixing them, right? We need a process to be able to do that, and process is more important, in my opinion, than what you know. Like what you know at any given time is probably like the least that you will know about the problem, especially when you're starting out. Like so, when you start out, you know the least about the problem, but you can have a great process for gathering information. And the idea with debugging is this process is always going to be around and you're always going to need it. But the quicker we can become and the more efficient we can become at identifying what's going wrong, the quicker we can become at coming up with a solution. So first thing I want to do is talk about pry, just because it's such an integral part of not just mod 1, but really the Ruby language and debugging in both Ruby and Rails while you're at Turing, that it's worth talking about. So if you haven't been using pry, you've been making things harder on yourself than they should be. And the sooner you start using pry, the sooner you start getting comfortable with it, the better you will become at programming in Ruby. That is a fact. So what is pry? It's a REPL, right? So like I can type pry in my terminal and I can run Ruby commands like this, and it gives me the return value right away of whatever code I executed, right? Like it gives me immediate feedback on what I'm trying to do. And this is what makes pry so powerful, is the immediacy of the feedback. So pry is a REPL. It's read, evaluate, print, loop. And so that's what it's doing here, is it's reading what I have put in, and then it evaluates that code, prints out the return value, and now it's ready for more input, and it's ready for me to give it another command. All right, so that's what we mean by REPL. And so the idea here is that like anytime you have some kind of thought in your head, like I wonder if this would work, this is your playground. This is where you can go to figure out if those things do work. All right, so the other great thing about pry is we can use it to stop our code, right? At any point in time, within any scope, within a method, within a test, within a class, outside of a class, I can put a pry somewhere, right? And then I can easily stop execution and look around at any point, all right? So if I have a file, if I make a new file here, I'll make it outside. If I touch a file called pry.rb, I open up Atom, and now if I go to this pry file, I type in some code, and all I've done here is assign an array to a variable, but then I have this pry. The great thing about it is I can execute this, and pry puts me back into that REPL, but at the point that I am in the code of executing the code. All right, so this is how I can stop my code at any point, and I can look around. All right, I can see what these things represent at any moment, okay? And I can see if things will work at this point in the code, right? So I can say something, I can try things like looping. Let's map this, and we'll use the single line syntax, thing and thing dot, what's a string method that's fun? Split, maybe? Yeah, let's try that. Ooh, look at that thing I did. I don't even know what I did. I made a multi-dimensional array where I split each word based on the space that was between each word. And now those are elements within an array. Great, cool. I can try things in here. I can see if things work. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Sometimes when I'm running in Pry, it'll say, I think it says enumerator and like dot, 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 and it doesn't really have any sort of output.
Yeah.
Can you maybe clarify, like you just did map and it worked,
Yep.
maybe because it was a single line, but can you clarify when and why that happens?
Yeah, so sometimes I think if I do it, I think I can get this to happen like this. So what I've done here is I've basically typed in enumerator, but I haven't given it the block that it expects. So this code runs and it says, here you go, you have an enumerator object back, but that's the return value, and that's not, um, it's not basically being used the way it's intended, where the enumerator actually runs. An enumerator is this object of like what enumerables return, but like yeah, this works, like it doesn't error, but it's basically saying like map is an enumerator object, so now you got to give it the block to go ahead and execute whatever it needs to do, whatever you're intending to do. So basically the return value of any enumerable is an enumerator object. I believe that this will run the same for each, find all. And so it basically, if you see this, you didn't complete the code block. You didn't like use the enumerable. You called it by saying dot map or dot each or whatever, but then you didn't give it a block, so now you get this. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, great. Let's see. Yeah, so back to the lesson. So pausing, we can pause, we can try things, right? Like we can stop our code, all right? And I'm flying through this because I want to spend more time on other things. But what I'll say about this lesson plan, it's worth your time, right? It's worth 20 minutes of reading through it at some point and making sure you understand what is happening here in Pry. And if you don't understand something, like ask the question, and like we will either answer it or your classmates will answer it. But like this lesson, the debugging lesson is more important, and this lesson is kind of meant as like like an that's the wrong word, not affidavit, like a supplement. It's a supplementary like resource for you to be able to look at. So cool. So resuming, here I am in Pry. Remember, I stopped my code. Maybe you don't remember. I stopped my code way up here on line 4. I executed this file and I ran into this Pry, and now I've just been trying things, trying things. I can always ask, where am I? Tells me where I am. It's a nice little trick. And I can always use exit to continue executing from wherever I am, continue executing the code. In this case, there's nothing there left to do. Binding.pry was the last part of my execution, so when I exit, we finish executing the Ruby file and it's done. But exit is how we continue executing the code from where we are in Pry. So if you have a Pry in your test and you wanted to look around, but your test suite is running and you want to keep running that test suite, then you can exit and it'll continue running. One thing to note about Pry that I don't even think is in this lesson, if you put it somewhere in your test, or I'm sorry, if you put it somewhere in your code and you are testing, like say you put it in a method and it's the last thing to run in that method, it will return nil, okay? So remember this, if the Pry is the last thing to run in your method, it returns nil. So if you're getting an error or a failure in your test and you have a Pry in your code still, make sure to take out the Pry and then execute your test. Like yes, this Pry, if you hit exit, will continue executing, and if it's not the last thing in a method, then it won't return nil and it won't probably screw up whatever you expect. But if it is the last thing that runs, it can certainly cause unexpected behavior. So remember that.
When
Yeah, go ahead.
When you say if pry is the last thing, do you mean the very last thing before the end statement in the method block?
Correct. Yeah. So in a method, yes. And then similarly, even within like if you have pry in a loop, right? So say you have pry within an enumerable loop and it's the last thing to run, that could change your output dramatically based on the pry being returned at the end of the loop. So just be aware of that. Be aware that like, yes, pry is great for looking around. When you're executing your code and like running your tests, it's generally best to like comment it out or take it out, run the code to see like how like make sure that things are working the way you expect, but the pry will mess it up if it's left in. So just a note on that. Good follow-up question. Cool. So the other thing I want to talk about, yeah, we talked about stopping. So yeah, you just want to show this. You can put a pry within a loop, right? So if I add this to my editor here, and I run it, so now I'm here inside this do end block. This works for a times, it works for an each, it works for a map, it works for any block. I can say, okay, like let's see favorite things, it's still the same, but now when I exit, I hit it again. Exit, hit it again, all right? So like if you're in a loop and you want to see a couple of different elements and how things are behaving, you can do this. Just remember, it's annoying if you like can't get out of something. You can always get out with a triple bang. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
And I don't know if Pry has this capability or not, but is there a way if you're iterating through something and then maybe, every once in a while you'll get an error, is there a way to pry into it right before it hits that error?
I'm so glad you asked this. Yes, there is. So I'll show you how to do this. So let's say I have this block, and so I know that the times method will take a block variable if I want it, which basically just counts the index position. So I'll actually rename it that so you can see what it is. This just represents the index position if I make a block variable. It works without it, but I can give it to it here. So now, if I want to only hit it whenever something is true, so say this is erroring on the very last time through here, so I can say if index position is 24, then let's hit this pry. Otherwise, let's just keep going, right? So I should see favorite things puts to the screen a number of times when I execute this, and then on that final run through, I should hit the pry, and my index position should be 24. Indeed, that's what I have here. So I've set up an if condition to only hit a pry if one thing is true, and I can see index position is indeed 24. If I exit, that's the end of execution because that was the final time through the loop. Hash, you look like you have some more to say.
That's cool. I didn't think about that.
Yep.
But is there a way to hit the pry if an error occurs?
Like yes. Okay, so kind of, right? So you have to know some information about your error, right? So say it's like, okay, like sometimes my index position is nil, right? What if my index position was nil? So sometimes some variable that you set or some parameter that you set happens to be nil. You don't expect this, and it's giving you the error undefined method for nil class. Right. And you're like, what the hell? Okay, so here's what you want to do. It's similar, but you want to say if index position dot nil, you can do this. This is like, hey, if this value over here is a nil value, then this whole thing returns true, and then we will get into this block, and then you can, at that point, look around and be like, what the hell's going on here? Why is it like this?
Yeah, that was having that issue with a method name class for War or Peace but it just happened randomly, and I could never figure it out, and that would have helped me a ton.
Totally. Yeah, no, this is like a trick that no one ever showed me that like I came up with at some point in my career where I needed this to happen like only at this point, and I was like, oh, I just write a little if statement for it, and it's super powerful, right? Because it gives you, especially in loops in times where scenarios are changing. It's like, okay, like I only need this pry when this specific thing is happening. So yeah, that's this is like a great way to be able to do that.
Can you one-liner it as well? Just say binding.pry if index position .nil.
I believe yes. Let's see. So I shouldn't hit this, right? Because the index position should never be nil at this point. So I shouldn't hit it. I don't. But if I say equal 24, now I should hit it. And I do. Yeah, so you can do it both ways.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's kind of all I wanted to say on pry. I'm down for follow-up questions, but also remember this. There's always some tidbits if you just read the lesson. Let me see if I can make this happen. This thing happen just so I can show you. So let's have our pry down here, and let's just make this editor real long. Yeah, and then let's run it and see if I can get this thing to happen. Okay, so sometimes your terminal window is big, full screen. Sometimes it's small, right? Just depending on whatever your setup is. Sometimes you'll hit a pry. Let's get rid of that and get rid of this. Okay. Sometimes you'll have a very long file and a lot of things in a method or in a class, and you'll get to this point and you'll say, I can't type things. What is happening? This is dumb. If you are at this point and you can't see your pry, it's because it's further down in the file. All right, so you can down arrow to get to it, but you don't even have to. You can simply hit the character Q, and it works so that it now is ready to execute commands. Okay, so now I can like actually type things. All right, so that's just like something you have to know. I don't know what else to say about it except when you run into it and you don't know it, it's super frustrating. Okay, follow-up questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I've had that like kind of break your terminal before, to where like you'll start trying to type and nothing shows up until you hit enter. So then you just have to, like, if that does happen to you, you just got to close it out and then like reopen it, because it just breaks your terminal.
Totally. So breaks your terminal is like is an aggressive way to say it.
True.
I would say like stops accepting input the way that you expect is probably how I would say it, but totally valid. Sometimes you get into weird states in the terminal and maybe it's best to just quit and restart. I do want to show you though that I don't think this will happen if my terminal is full screen. Yeah, it doesn't. So it's only like when like your terminal is like kind of like smaller that you'll generally run in this. Sometimes it could happen with full screen if you have enough context, but it's just something to know. All right, what else is coming up? Okay, moving on then. Yeah, let's go into the debugging lesson. Cool. So big things with debugging is, I'm going to say this again because it matters, it's process. Process, process, process. Process is what matters. What you know about the problem matters less than your process to go figure things out. All right. So we're going to read a stack trace. We're going to understand what a stack trace is. We're going to read some common Ruby error messages that you're going to get familiar with, like Hash and I were talking about the one like undefined method for nil class. That one's like a common one where you have a nil value, you try to call a method on it and Ruby's like, no, sorry, that method does not exist for nil. Yeah, and we're gonna talk about like developing this process. So we're talking about pry, cool. We just talked about pry, awesome. Yeah, so 2 things to remember for debugging. Sometimes Ruby will say, no, I cannot continue executing, and will throw an error message. Sometimes your program will run, but the values that you're comparing are not what you expect, or what the test expects, I should say. So you get a failure, your test fails, okay? So the idea here is that we are going to have a process for going about figuring out both of these scenarios. This is the biggest thing to remember. This is something I see students every mod. It's the same thing. I wish I could like somehow get this like just upload it to your brains. Read the whole error, read the whole error, read the whole error. A lot of times you're gonna assume something is happening, but let me tell you that the computer is never wrong, and you are often wrong. I am often wrong. The computer is not wrong, okay? Like, it is not, the error message that the computer is telling you is never going to be, I shouldn't say never, is likely not going to be wrong, all right? So you should follow that error message by reading it all, looking at the line number, looking at the error that it's throwing you, and yeah, looking at it. So this is kind of like the idea behind your debugging process, and you can think of this as like similar to like how I talked about the productive struggle, unproductive struggle lesson. Like, this is the base, right? This is the baseline for your debugging process, and you will add things along the way as you develop, as you advance in your career. You will add more to this, but this is the gist, that this is never going away. Read the whole error. Read your stack trace to find out where the error is, what line number, what file, so what method. All of those things are important. Verify your assumptions is now this part where this is why pry is a great thing, right? I can stop the execution right before the error hits, and I can look around. I can check what I think my variables are versus what they actually are, and then try things, right? I can try things in pry. I can try a different method. I can, write things a different way. I mean, there's a lot of things that I can try, but we have to experiment in order to move through some of these errors. Like, just running the test suite and looking at the error and hoping that it goes away is not a great process. And I know that sometimes it can be, you can get to that point where you're that frustrated, and things aren't going the way that you can. But the process here is always going to be around. Yeah, and you could say like research is something that you could add here, but like researching methods and like looking on Stack Overflow and looking at documentation is so that you can try things, right? Like, you need to know, all right, I'm trying to make this, I'm trying to split this string every time that there's a certain character, and like that is part of my process, but that's like the precursor to being able to try things. Okay, so stack trace. Let's look at an example for stack trace. So it's basically showing you the paths of execution that happened, what was called to get to this point, and then what point did we actually stop executing and why. All right, and so that's all of that, all of those clues and all of that like vital information is here in the stack trace, right? These errors, you might not think of it this way now, but the error is your friend. The stack trace is your friend. It is information for you to go and figure out what's going wrong. And one of the things that I notice, like a lot of junior developers, they get frustrated when they see error messages. Senior developers, I wouldn't say get excited, but are happy to see error messages because they know that there's a lot of clues as to what's going on and what's going wrong within there. All right, so if I change into my Erroneous Creatures directory here, let me just change this Does anyone remember the command to change it to main, like right off the bat? I just don't want to see this anymore. I know I have it somewhere in here.
Are you talking about git branch -m master main?
That is what I'm talking about. Awesome. Git branch -m master main. I knew one of y'all would know it. Great. That looks better. And we'll clear
Don't
this.
forget to change your upstream.
Yeah, I'm not gonna push probably, so but I will. But
Okay.
yeah, but not for this lesson. But thanks, Priya. Okay, so here I am, and the lesson says to run the Hobbit test. So let's do that. Cool. I get this stack trace. Now, this is something we're going to break down. All right. And so you can think of the stack trace as basically everything from here on. All right. First, it's giving us our error, right? This is our error. This indented is our stack trace. Okay. And so it's basically saying like, hey, this in chronological order, this first thing here is going to be like closest to the problem, right? This right here, this stack trace, this trace of, you know, where this file is and in what method, this is the closest I can get to where the error occurred, all right? And that is on line 18 in my Hobbit file is what it says in this adult method, which is just kind of like some more information, okay? And then as I move downward, I move further away from the problem and further away from where the error occurred, but this line of code was run, this play method on 22 was run, which then called into this adult method, all right? And so that's why there's this stack trace, because it's basically like, hey, this stuff was still on the stack. I hadn't finished executing any of this stuff, but then I ran into this error over here. But here's all of the things in chronological order that were called in order for me to get into this method. And then we can even see, yep, here in the Hobbit test, okay, so this is where we kind of like originated, like there's a block in here in this test method. There is a times method within that block that I called to get into that block. And then here is the actual method that started execution, which was test can get tired if play 3 times. All right, so one more time. The first thing I called is down here at the bottom. It's also the furthest away from where the error occurred. But by me calling this test can get tired if play 3 times method, that started off the execution of this, led into this file, which led into this method, which got me to my error. All right, so this is very important in tracking things down, because a lot of times what caused the error is a few steps back in the execution process. Something that happened a few steps back led to the error that's happening where this is happening on line 18, all right? And so this is like, kind of, you can think of it as like a little scavenger hunt of like, hey, where are things at and what happened to get to this point? And that's what the stack trace is gonna tell you. Yeah, go ahead, Angela.
I was wondering, for like really big applications, would the stack trace be super long when you get an error?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes the stack trace can be hundreds of lines long because there's that many moving parts that are working together to eventually get to some line of execution.
In that case, you probably care about the first few that tell you that are closest to your error.
Generally, yes. Yeah, generally the closer to the error you can get, like the more relevant it is. However, sometimes the first thing that happened, there was something that went wrong or something that was unexpected, and that led to, you know, whatever the error is. So it can go both ways. Generally, it's best to start at the top, right? Look, like where should my eyes go? Right here at the top. They should go to line 18 in Hobbit, in adult, and that's undefined method greater than or equal for nil class. That's where I'm going to start. right? And then I'm gonna work my way down if I can't figure it out right there. All right, so let's do that. I'll open up Atom, and I'm gonna give you all a palm real quick, but I just wanna see if like I can go straight to this place. I remember it was Hobbit, right? And it was line 18. Okay, I'm here. And indeed, I can kind of see the problem right away. I'm looking and I'm seeing this like at age instance variable here, this at age adder accessor here, and I'm seeing this is called at a G, and that doesn't quite exist. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change one thing. I'm gonna see if that fixes my problem, and it does. All right, so generally this is the case, right? You go to right where the top of the stack trace tells you to go to, and you can see the problem. Sometimes it's a few down the line. All right, let's take a palm. Or wait, someone has a hand up. Sorry, my friend. I see that you have your hand up, but I'm not recognizing your name from your face.
That's me.
Philip, cool.
I've been thinking of it is kind of like it's like your stack is like a trail of damage almost, where like it originates in one spot and then it has this like rippling effect throughout the rest of what you're seeing in your stack.
Yeah, you can think of it that way. Totally. It's a trail, right? It's a trail back to like, hey, what started? And here I can show you the entire thing. Let's do that before we break. I'll show you the entire process, start to finish, of like why the stack trace matters and why all of that stuff even showed up, right? Like, okay, so if I look back at my trace, line 74, tests can get tired. All right, that's where I need to go to start. And indeed, I can see, okay, I'm in this method. It's line 74. Okay, so 3.times do started running. Indeed. Oh, that's another part of the stack trace, right? Like the times method here. So here, let me put this to the side so you can see both. So it said, okay, 3.times. Yep, that's another part of my stack trace here. It's in there. And then there's a block. So that's referring to the do end. And that's on 75. So now hobbit.play got called. And it's saying like, okay, in this block, play gets called here. And that play exists on line 22. All right, now I got to switch over here and look at line 22. Oh, okay, so now I'm within the play method. And on line 22, adult is called, and then that indeed calls into this method. All right, so you can see the path of execution here. All right, let's take a break. Come back at 38.
Thank you, 38.
Thanks, 38.
Thank you, 38.
All right, it's 1:38, so let's start back up. I'm gonna put y'all into breakout rooms because time to get your hands dirty, better than just listening to my voice. I'm sure if you're anything like me, you're probably sick of hearing it by now. But let's get into it. So in the README of Erroneous Creatures, there is a suggested order of how to go about this. And I want y'all to, you're gonna use the driver navigator style, all right? Whoever's name why can't I ever say this with alphabet? Whoever's name is closer to the end of the alphabet will be the driver, and the other person will be the navigator. There'll be one group of three. So start with unicorn test, all right? And let's only go to Hobbit test. If you can get through that, great. If you can't, if you get through it and you finish, then then do it with your partner screen, all right? Because you want to be this is repetitive, but repetition is how you're going to get better at this. So you'll do unicorn test first, then vampire, then dragon, then hobbit. And let me just post those in the chat. Start by running the test. There's some skips in there. Unskip the test, move on, okay? And remember, everything is your friend. Like, every resource is available. The lesson plan is a great resource. There's probably some tidbits in there if you get stuck. Google's a great resource. One thing that I like to do sometimes, and I'll share my screen for this because I think it's worth seeing. If I look here and I look at my error message, sometimes I like to simply copy the error from my terminal, go into my Google, and type in the error, and that is something I feel like students don't do enough, so I just wanted to show you that is okay. I literally just copied and pasted whatever the error was into my terminal. I might not get exactly what I want, but it's a good place to start. All right, cool. So let me make some brain. Okay, so generally we don't want to ignore any part of the stack trace. We want to read it all, but there is one time when it is okay to ignore the stack trace, and only one time. And so that will be, if I run this unicorn test, like this first part, the parts here that I can ignore are the code that I know that I didn't write, right? Like, yeah, part of my stack trace right here refers to kernel require.rb line 54, but I didn't write that code. Ruby maintainers wrote that code, so I'm not gonna look there, right? So this is kind of like, it also says it right here. The parts that I can ignore are the parts that I didn't write, which is referring, if we look at this whole path, into the core executable Ruby code. All right, so what I should be focused on is right here, unicorn test is, that's the file that I have written, and this error message here cannot load such a file. Load error. All right, so I just want to point that out. Let's take a palm, and then we'll have a couple people share. Sorry, yeah, 208. Okay, we're back. It's 208. Let's jump back into it. So I think I'm just going to call on people to share. And if you weren't the driver and don't have the most up-to-date code, then your driver will share. But I'd love to hear from Sean. Love to see your group, where y'all got to. If you got to an error that you're like, I don't get this one, I couldn't get past it, that's cool. But let's show it.
Yeah, I don't know if I botched this or not, because the unicorn one actually had us do quite a few things, but when we got into the other ones, they were all just passing.
Interesting.
But yeah, so what in particular did you?
Yeah, let's look at what's the last one that you ran?
We got through all of them since it wasn't really giving us any issues.
Interesting. So let's run yeah, let's run, looks like you have a pry in Hobbit. Let's look at Hobbit.
Do you want me to take the pry out?
Yeah.
Oh, there's another pry.
It looks like it didn't save.
Oh.
You got to get the autosave feature. Okay, cool. So
Oh,
those all
related
run.
to that, how do we turn on the autosave feature?
It's like a package that you get from Atom, and then just enable. And then I think it's just, I can't remember how you do it exactly, but that's like something worth Googling, because I know y'all can figure that one out. So you got through all of them. And which ones were not giving you any errors?
Pretty much Unicorn and Hobbit were the only ones that gave us some errors, and Hobbit only gave us, I don't know, 2 errors, 2 failures.
Okay.
Dragon didn't give you any?
Mm-mm.
Let's run Dragon. Interesting.
Are you sure you didn't do these before by chance?
Yeah, that's what I'm
I
asking.
did the mythical creatures, but not the erroneous ones.
Huh. Well,
John.
I
What
don't
did
like
I-
that.
What did I do?
All right, so Sean's not the best person to have called on since he is a working repo, but I do appreciate the share. I will reluctantly ask Danny to share, and we can look at the dragon.
Thanks for prefacing that with a reluctantly.
I'll acquiesce to your request.
I'll let that one roll off my back, Tim. All right.
Okay. Yes.
Is it big enough for everybody's?
Can we make both just slightly bigger? I'm like kind of squinting.
You need to get your specs.
I'm nearsighted, so this just needs to be bigger.
How's that?
Maybe a little bigger.
Are you just fucking with me now?
I'm not. Please, can we make it more like zoom in on the text? Awesome. All right. So, yeah, let's run it.
We got ourselves an error. Hold on, let me resize my windows since they're like gigantic.
Hate to see you not using Spectacle to do that.
Well, I don't want it to be like evenly spaced.
I see.
Okay, we're getting the wrong number of arguments.
Okay, so let's break this down. Tell me what this error says to you.
To me, it says that we are in our dragon test tested exists. We have an argument error, wrong number of arguments, given 3, but expected 0. And then this kind of goes a little bit further into like our initialize on test line 9.
Yep, so let's break down this wrong number of arguments. Given 3, expected 0. What does like that tell you just about like, because we can see it's in initialize, and then new is what called into initialize. So what does that tell you about initialize?
Oh, it tells me that something's wrong, Tim.
I totally agree.
Expected and given are not matching up.
Hey, Danny.
Correct. Yeah, go ahead.
Danny, could I suggest the spelling of initialize is wrong?
In here? In it. Teal. Like that, Hope? Fabulous.
Look at that. So here's what to remember when you've got a method written, right? Like, especially this one with initialize, it's interesting because the method is written and you think that it should be working, but when you know you have something and it's not working the way that you expect, we got to like think about what we know about initialize. If initialize expects 0 arguments, then that to me tells me I'm either writing it with no arguments, which clearly I wasn't doing because I had 3 in the one that was written over here on Dragon, and I can see that there are 3 arguments there. So if that's not the case, then what else I know about initialize is that it runs under the hood, right? Like it'll run if it's not defined. So I have to define it with like the number of arguments that I want it to have for it to not run under the hood. So if it's saying it expects 0, then that's like my key of like, okay, like I should, I should like think something is wrong with the initialize method and how it's written. So let's change it back to how it was before when it was misspelled.
I don't know if I can even smell it now.
Init AI, yeah, there you go. All right, so let's put a pry right in the first line of initialize. Cool, and let's run it. See, so I don't hit the pry. And this is how I can also get more information, right? I'm not even hitting this method that I think I should be hitting. So here's where I can say like, oh, all right, if I'm not getting into here, then either I'm spelling .new wrong or I'm spelling initialize wrong because this isn't working the way that I expect.
But it's not even getting past this line. Okay.
Totally.
Okay. I can proceed through the rest of these, and you can call some other person if you'd like.
Yeah, who else had an error that they were not happy about, and they didn't they just didn't figure out?
Yes, thank you, Hope.
All right, Tyler, go ahead.
So the very last failure, which we actually didn't get to because the 60 seconds popped up and Angela was like, "I'm out of here." But this guy right here, the expected true to not be truthy.
Yep.
I just don't quite know what that means. And I don't know what the refute means either.
Totally. Great question. So let's look, it's on line 47. So will you do a Command L and just highlight that line in Atom? Yep, perfect. So that's where we're at. Can you make it a little bigger too? Sorry.
Got it.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I love it. I'll take it as big as that. Okay, cool. So couple of things. If you don't know what refute does, what do you think you should do?
Google it.
Exactly, right? So I would do something like mini
Didn't quite get
test
there.
mini test refute. And no, that's okay. That's okay. But I just wanted to point that out first. But what refute does is says it basically expects a falsy value. So it takes one argument, which in this case is hobbit.adult, and it expects that to either be false or it expects it to be nil. All right. And so if it's truthy, so if it's true, or if it's like any data type that is truthy, which is a data type that exists, so not nil or false, then it will fail. And so that's what this error message is saying. Expected, true is the value you got back, to not be truthy. So it expected the true value you got back to be falsy.
Got it.
Which I don't know why they write it that way. I would think expected true to be falsy would be more clear, but yeah. Yeah, good question there.
So there was because our condition said greater than or equal to 32, and it had 32 birthdays that it celebrated.
We have to put this code back on the screen for me to tell you, but probably I assume like that assumption is correct.
Tyler, I hit enter right when the thing popped up.
I figured that's what happened.
Cool. Do you want to show the screen, Angela or Tyler, so we can see like what that actually is saying? Okay, so age greater than or equal to 32. 32 dot times. All right, so what I would do here is I would look at, I would throw a pry in my test, right before the failure. So if I wanted to put a pry right before the failure happens, yeah, let's do that. And then I want to look around basically.
I think it's just the test, like we don't know the definition of an adult for a hobbit. You're muted, Tim.
I think greater than or equal to 32 is what we should assume, right? So less than, so 31 or less, we should assume is a child, right?
Right.
So there's like a number of things that you could do here, right? If the test is saying test is considered a child at 32, then we need to look. Let's look at what our Hobbit object looks like in Pry.
So just type Hobbit.
Yep. Cool. So I can see that the age there in my instance variable is 32, right? Like I can see that is the case. So at this point, if I want the Hobbit to be a child at 32, then I need to change my condition, like Angela said, right? So it's greater than or equal to here, and I need to change it to something else. What should I change it to?
Should we change the number to 31, or would it be better to change the
I would
condition?
just delete the equal.
Yeah, I think changing it to greater than 32, because if you look at test is considered a child at 32, that to me means that the age has to be greater than 32
Right.
for it to be an adult. And now if we go out of pry and we run it, should hit the pry again. Yeah, we got to take that out. Cool, let's run it again. All right, so now we're hitting a different, that one ran because now we're hitting something on line 70.
Okay.
This is why it's always good to read our error, right? Got to read the error message, read it clearly. It's like expected false, actual true, which is very similar to the problem we were just working on. We were dealing with true false values, but if I look and I see what the failure actually is, it's from a different method, right, and a different line number.
And it's funny, I actually changed this method. There were two failures, and I fixed this one first before the other one. And now since we changed the adult, now this is back to, so this was true, I believe.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so I want to give you all some more time to work on this. And what I'm going to say is this is worth going through again. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch driver and navigator. All right, and we're going to start from scratch. So the way that you can start from scratch, if you have made a ton of changes and you're like, what the heck, I don't want to lose these, is you can just clone this repo down somewhere else, so in a different directory, so that you can start fresh. But switch driver navigator, all right, and let's take like 20 minutes on this. Let's go through it again, because I want you all to get super familiar with not only the error messages, but where to put a pry, right? Where to, like, and this time, if you didn't use pry a ton this time, I want to encourage you to put the pry before you make the change. Put the pry right before where the error happens, and see if you can get comfortable putting the pry the line before the error. All right. Cool. We'll take like a little bit less time on this. We'll take like 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and close it out. Let me record. Okay. I want to review some of the common error messages that you're going to see in Ruby, because the more familiar that you can get with these error messages, then the more efficient you'll become at approaching them and trying to fix them. All right. So remember to read the entire error message, number one, and let's break these down. I'm sure you've seen this one: uninitialized constant, some class, some constant, right? Ruby doesn't know what some constant is, okay? So if I want to recreate this error, I can recreate it really anywhere where Ruby doesn't know about some class, right? So if I'm in the main Ruby scope, I can do a capital string, and this refers to the class string, and Ruby will tell me in pry, like, okay, like I know about string, okay? But let's say, so I'm just like in, like, all I did was type pry into my terminal, so Ruby doesn't know about a det class, and it'll tell me uninitialized constant dec, because it doesn't know anything about dec. So when you get this in a test, let's look at, let me recreate this in a test. Yeah, let's go to Hobbit. So if I want to get this in Hobbit, I can refer to something that's not required in here, like dragon. Dragon.new, and I should get this error, and we can break it down. Cool. Indeed, I do. On line 8, all right, so let's look here. Line 8, uninitialized constant, hobbit test, : dragon. And that is basically saying, if we go back to our lesson, it's saying Ruby doesn't know what some constant is. Some class is where I tried to refer to some constant, okay? So that's the thing here. In my class, hobbit test, I tried to refer to dragon, and Ruby doesn't know about that. All right, so that's how we can break down this error. Here's where I called it. Here's what I called. It does not exist, uninitialized constant. Cool. Yeah, this next one. Okay, undefined local variable or method X for some object. So Ruby doesn't know whatever you're referring to is. It goes through a process. It says, hey, look at my scope. Do I have a local variable named X? No. Okay. Let's expand my scope to the entire class that I'm in. Do I have a method called X? No. Okay. Undefined local variable or method. All right. And I can recreate this one pretty easy by going into pry and just trying to execute some variable. And it says, sorry, you didn't define some variable. So that means to make this exist, I would either need to define it as a method or as a local variable. So now some variable exists. Some other variable still doesn't exist. All right, so that's what that one is broken down and means. Wrong number of arguments, given however many, expected this many. All right, this one you'll generally see anytime like you're passing methods arguments. They expect something to be pretty specific. So if I am in pry and I pass split, this split method, like a bunch of arguments here. So let's pass it 1, 2, 3 arguments. It's going to give me the wrong number of arguments there. All right, so this says I gave it 3, but what I actually expected was somewhere between 0 arguments and 2 arguments. So this is telling me I can give split a range of arguments. It's got to be between 0 and 2. All right, so this is what that tells me. Cool. Yeah, and then this one, our favorite, undefined method, some method for some object, some class. All right, so you tried to call a method on some object, but some object doesn't respond to that method because some method is not defined on some class. All right, so let's look at it a couple of times. So hello world.first, this is probably its most basic form. Undefined method first for hello world string. All right, so the object here is this string within quotes hello world. The class is string where this method does not exist. There is no first method for a string. There is bracket notation, but there is no first. All right, first only exists on, not only, but first exists on arrays. Cool. And then, yeah, this one is the one that you're going to see a lot. So we've got a nil value, and you try to call like add. If we think of like back to today's challenge, I think like add product, and then maybe we add like chicken. Undefined method add product. You called it on a nil, which is the object, an instance of nil class. All right, and add product doesn't exist on nil class. So you're going to see this. What that means is generally this value is undefined. All right, so if we go back to my previous example, you have some you have something that you think is defined over here on the left side of the dot, and it is not defined. It is nil. Okay, and so when I run this, same kind of thing. Actually, this one looks like it is defined, I guess, some other variable. Maybe I did define it. But I tried to call some other variable. Oh no, this one, so sorry, it didn't even get past this. So it didn't even get past some other variable in this case, undefined local variable or method. All right, this is why it's good. See, look what I did. I assumed, right? First thing I did, I wanted to do it. I've been at this 3 more years than y'all. First thing I want to do is assume I'm right. I'm not right. The error message is right, okay? Cool, so if I wanted this actually to do what I want it to do, I'll define something and then I'll call some method. Right? Undefined method, some method for nil class. Generally, what's happening here is you think that this has a value and it does not. Cool. Yeah, unexpected keyword end of input. This one is kind of like the hard one to figure out, right? If you don't have the right number of ends, you better hope that you indented properly so that you can figure out where something is missing. This is constantly going to happen with like when you're creating blocks, when you're creating if statements, you forget to put ends. It's hard to figure out. This is why indenting is your friend. So when you do forget an end, it's easier to pattern match based on whether it's indented. Yeah, and this require is the load error. It's basically saying like whatever file name you gave us has either the incorrect name or the incorrect path, okay? Cool. Questions on any of this? Questions on anything that came up in Erroneous Creatures or any of these common error messages? Yeah, go ahead, Carson. You're
Took me
muted,
a second
Carson.
to find the mute there.
You're good.
So we were doing the wizard test.
You want to share? Because that'll be the easiest
absolutely.
way. Yep. Oh, I probably have to stop. Cool.
Cool, there you go. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
So we were trying to figure out this test here.
Cool.
Let me get out of my pry here. And we know that here, I'll just run it. So it says bearded false to not be expected, bearded false to not be truthy.
Yeah, I love this one. So what does this say to you? Like, what is it saying? Tell me what you know.
So I know that the wizard's name is Valerie and her beard, she does not have a beard.
Cool.
And the refute is going to the bearded method and saying that it's the opposite of what is given here.
Close, yeah, you're on the right track. So where can we put our pry to start checking some assumptions and looking around?
Here.
Yeah, I love that that as a great starting spot. Cool. All right, so we have a wizard. Let's look at our wizard. Cool. And then we can see that wizard has this @bearded instance variable, which I think we can retrieve by calling wizard.bearded ? Cool. So what we're doing here is we're retrieving bearded ? We're retrieving the instance variable, which happens to be a hash. The hash has a symbol that is bearded and it points to a value of false. So the key is the symbol bearded and the value is false. So we don't want the hash back, it doesn't look like. It looks like we want that false value back. Does that make sense that we want the false value back here?
Yes. So
well, it's okay if it doesn't. It's totally okay.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Would I get rid of that or would I keep that?
Keep what?
The bearded on line 23.
Yeah, so we definitely want to keep Line 23. Yeah, so we definitely want to keep it the way it is because we can see from like the rest of our test setup that it looks like passing in this hash of bearded false is kind of like what it expects. So at this point, and we can see if we look at our line 6 of wizard, we can see bearded is assigned a default value of bearded true if we don't pass in bearded false. All right, so there's a lot of moving parts here. What I want you to do now is generally when there's a failure, it means we have to change some code inside one of our methods to do something that it isn't doing. All right, so let's, we kind of gain some information. We see what bearded is returning. And so this is exactly like what our refute is saying. It's saying like, hey, I expected this hash, which is a truthy value because it exists, to be falsy. So either be nil or false. And if I want to dig into this hash and return the value, then I need to manipulate it like a hash and give it the key. So let's do this. Let's exit out of this pry. Cool, let's get rid of the pry in our test. And let's put a pry on between lines 11 and 12, so we're within bearded. So now we can actually like be somewhere where we can do the work required to get this to pass. So basically what this is saying is like, now we're where we want to be scope-wise, but we're saying like there's an @bearded instance variable, and then there's an @bearded question mark method that is supposed to just tell us whether that value of bearded is true or false. It's supposed to return that value, right? And so if we think back to our hash lesson, let's look at @bearded. So if you, yeah, you're good. So if you type @bearded, yep, exactly. Cool, so that's a hash, right? So how do we verify that that's a hash?
Do that.
Well, that's going to give us a symbol.
.class.
Yeah, so let's call .class just to make sure. So let's call @bearded.class. Looks like a hash, but I just want to be sure. Okay, cool, it's a hash. So at this point, @bearded is a hash, and we can call any hash methods that exist on @bearded. All right, and so you were on the right track when you started typing in the key, right? But we have a special notation, a special syntax that we have to give hashes in order to retrieve the values. So we give the key in brackets in order to get the value. So let's try @bearded, because @bearded represents our hash. So now at this point, right when we have @bearded, now we can call anything the same way we would on any hash. So at this point, we can give it the brackets and we can give it the key in brackets to get the value.
Like that.
Yeah, that looks good. And at this point, bearded is true.
Okay.
But here's the thing. So I want to like clear up one more thing. The reason bearded is true at this point is because we aren't in the test we think we are in, right? Like .bearded isn't just called in the test that we were messing around in down here. @bearded is also called here. It's also called some other places probably, but likely because the bearded is true right now, that means we are in a different test. A different test is executing to hit this pry, all right? So I think we have the code we want to execute. It's not giving us the value that we wanted, but I think what we can do here is copy and paste this code that we saw work from pry into our bearded method and see if that changes things. Love it.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and there's a lot of moving parts there, so that's why I wanted to like try to like break it down and take it like slower, because it's just that's a complex problem where there's a lot going on, and it's like first thing we have to determine what are we even trying to do here, right? Like I have this hash being returned. It has a value of false or true, but like I need to know that I need that value. And that's the first thing. Like it's like define the problem. Cool. That's it for today. Thanks for sticking with me. I know today's a long day. You got work time the rest of the day. Make sure to take a break. And yeah, see y'all tomorrow.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank
you.